Hi, my name is Debbie Innes-Turnill and I am a safeguarding consultant as well as a lecturer in child protection studies at the University of Birmingham. If you would like to get in touch with me, please go to my website debbieinnesafeguarding.co.uk and click on the Contact Us button. This film is a safeguarding update for September 2023 and it includes what you need to know for the next academic year, whether you are a class teacher, another member of school staff, or a designated safeguarding lead. First of all, I'd just like to reiterate the key messages from Keeping Children Safe in Education, which I will refer to as KCiE, that came through loud and strong last year in 2022. And these haven't changed. The biggest message is that staff should be aware that children are not always aware that they are experiencing abuse, and they're not always aware of how they can disclose about abuse. Many children will be expressing their lived experience of the abuse or trauma they are experiencing through their behaviour. So it's really important that you keep in mind that behaviour that looks as though it is challenging and may well be challenging if you are dealing with it as a class teacher might well be a sign that a child is trying to communicate something to you, and you need to be trying to listen to what they're saying, even when that might be very difficult. In order to do that, you need to have a good relationship with the children and young people in your classes, in your schools, and that will help them to communicate what is happening in their lives and help you to understand what they are experiencing. Keeping Children Safe in Education, KCiE last year said that all staff should provide a safe learning environment. That means making sure that it's an environment that children feel safe in, they feel comfortable in. That's not just about the health and safety of making sure that there aren't wires for children to trip over or chairs or whatever. It's also about a safe emotional environment where they don't feel that they're going to be ridiculed, where they know they're going to be listened to, and they know that people will do what they say they're going to do. It's important that you know what those key indicators of abuse and neglect are. You know, the four main categories of abuse that are defined in the 1989 Children Act and haven't changed are physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. Those are included in KCiE. Again, make sure you know what they are. If you're wanting further information, the NSPCC website is a really good place to go. And it's really important that you understand those and understand that they might overlap, that a child who is being neglected is probably being emotionally abused, that a child who is being sexually abused is inevitably going to be experiencing emotional abuse, and physical abuse and neglect are all interlinked. So make sure that you are aware of how they interlink. And on my website, there are some case studies that you can look at to see whether these are the sorts of things that you are seeing. You also need to know very clearly what to do if a child does disclose to you. That means telling you that they've been abused or neglected. Fundamentally, that's about making sure that the child feels supported, that they feel listened to, and that you do not promise them that you will keep whatever they've told you a secret. Every school will set out in their policy what you do next, and it's important that children have this explained to them once they've disclosed to you. You need to have a very clear awareness of all those other safeguarding issues that are covered in Annex B of KCiE. Those are the issues such as domestic abuse, radicalisation, contextual safeguarding issues like criminal exploitation, sexual exploitation, things like child-on-child abuse, things like racial abuse, things like female genital mutilation. All those things are contained in Annex B, and it's important that you know what those are. You also need to know what your school's version of early help is, and make sure you know what the criteria are for identifying children who might benefit from early help. So is that your school offers a food bank or a clothing bank, or your school offers English as additional language lessons, or that actually you have a child who has nits in the class and you have somebody who can explain to the parent how to remove the nits. It's important that you know what your school's process is, and that the school, through the designated safeguarding lead, know how to refer into the local authorities' early help process and know where they differ from each other. And there again, we've got the fact that mental health problems alongside behaviour can sometimes indicate that children are suffering or are at risk of suffering abuse, neglect and exploitation. And it's important that you see a child as a victim rather than as a perpetrator, or rather than as a difficulty that needs to be solved. So those are the key messages that are carried through from last year's KCiE and this one, alongside the fact that schools need to teach safeguarding. And that's not just the people who teach RSE or RHSE or PHSE, whatever it's called in your school. That's also about you knowing about the sorts of risks that pupils experience, whether you have got pupils who are carrying knives, whether you have got children who are experiencing other young people in their communities who are carrying knives, whether that's drugs, whether that's county lines, whether that's domestic abuse. It's all about everybody in school knowing enough of the basics to be able to recognise, but also to teach children around what is safe and what isn't safe, particularly in relation to their own relationships. And one of the key ways is every adult in school modelling respectful relationships so that children can learn about those. Every school has to have a really robust process for child-on-child sexual violence and harassment. That's included in part 5 again. It is the thread that runs through all the inspection processes, all the people I've spoken to who've had inspections. Ofsted or the Independent Schools Inspectorate will ask, what experiences have you had of child-on-child abuse and what do you do about it? So everybody in school needs to be really clear about what the definitions of those are and what happens. And then again, there is that emphasis on allegations management and low-level concerns being really important to make sure that overall schools are safe places for children. That means every single member of staff in school needs to have the courage to go to the head teacher or to the chair of governors if they think it's a head teacher and say, this is making me worried. I'm not sure that this person is safe to be working in our school or working with children. It's a really difficult thing for everyone to do. And I think it's probably the hardest thing that any member of school staff has to do against one of their colleagues, but it's vital. So make sure you know what your school's process is, what the definitions are in the policy in your school, so that you can make sure that your school is a safe place. There are not very many changes this year in keeping children safe in education. There's a slight change in definition from children missing education to children who are absent from education. I think this is because there have been some instances where schools have said to local authorities, well, this child's missing, and local authorities have said, yes, but you know where the child is, i.e. the child is at home. This is saying that this child is not coming to school every day. It's really important that all staff know to identify which children are persistently absent and therefore would come into this category. there are new responsibilities for filtering and monitoring, and that's to do with online safety. And we'll come back to that in a moment, because there are some clear things that are now falling on every member of staff in terms of filtering and monitoring. And then there's just a slight change in the definition of honour-based abuse. They call it so-called honour-based because it's not an honour. And the other thing under that definition is it's now illegal for anyone under the age of 18 to get married. So that's included within that section as well. And it's important that you know that it is, whereas the law used to say at 16 and 17, a young person could get married with their parents' consent. That is no longer the law. It is illegal to get married until you are 18. Okay, so let's have a quick look at these filtering and monitoring standards. I've just covered here the staff responsibilities. If you are a designated safeguarding lead, I do recommend that you read the filtering and monitoring standards. They're available on the DFE website. They are not very long, and they make it very clear that as a designated safeguarding lead, you are responsible for online safety in school. So make sure that you have read that and that you understand it, because I suspect it will start to appear in inspections and audits over the next year. So as a member of staff, you need to report any breaches of these standards. And what they cover there is that you have witnessed or you suspect unsuitable material has been accessed, that you have been able to see something that you shouldn't have been able to see in school, or you've mistyped something into a search engine and something's come up and you thought that's not appropriate for the children to see. You need to report that. You are needing to let your designated safeguarding lead or your IT lead, who is also might be taking a role in the filtering and monitoring standards, if you're going to be teaching topics that might test out your filtering log. It's particularly important if you are teaching sex education, for example, or if you're teaching about radicalisation, or you're teaching about criminal gangs. Those sorts of things might flag in your filter log. So make sure that somebody knows that you're teaching about those, and you won't be on the receiving end of a conversation that might be a little bit difficult. If you think that the software has failed or that a young person has abused the system, you need to make sure that somebody knows that really quickly. You also need to let people know if there have been things that you wanted to use that seem perfectly reasonable. You've been able to access them at home. You think they're really good teaching resources. And when you get into school, you can't access those. I certainly worked in a school in the last year where some of the resources from the KCiE organisation were filtered for some reason. So it is important that you flag that up and those are released to you. And then if there are things that allow access to restricted material because they have deliberately misspelt things. Some people, as we know, want to get to children and they deliberately make sure that things are spelt in a way that children would go for so that they can get through the filtering and monitoring that is taking place in school. So that's a brief outline of what you need to do as members of staff. And as I say, if you're a designated safeguarding lead or you're a head teacher, make sure you actually read the standards. I think they're really helpful. In terms of current issues that I think all staff need to continue to be aware of, I don't think that they've changed. We've already mentioned child-on-child abuse. We've already talked about behaviour and how a lot of schools are switching to a more relational policy where there is a bit of flexibility around whether a child is being deliberately going against the school boundaries or whether that child is unable to regulate themselves in order to adhere to the boundaries. So have a think about that. But there's certainly clear issues still about mental health and the need for support for children who've developed significant levels of anxiety or depression particularly since the COVID pandemic. And then there is also still ongoing issues around misogyny in schools and one of my partner organisations, Connects Education, have got a training module on how to challenge misogyny in schools, and I recommend that you have a look at that if you're not sure what you want to do around it. Certainly is an issue with young men in schools, particularly in secondary schools, where attitudes have become more and more challenging. And I think it's a really difficult thing that all schools need to be on top of, and every individual teacher needs to be on top of, to make sure that any comments are challenged the minute they are made. And then there's just a little bit here. This is sort of information for everyone, but particularly for designated safeguarding leads, around what might be coming over the horizon. There is definitely going to be a new Working Together to Safeguard Children. I think the consultation closes on the 6th of September in 2023. So I would expect that we'll have a new Working Together to Safeguard Children sometime during the next academic year. It is a document that every member of staff is supposed to have read. It's quite a significant document. My recommendation is that in the first instance, that staff are presented with a summary of that. As soon as the new document comes out, there will be a summary on my website for you to use with staff, or for staff to access for themselves. But as the designated safeguarding lead, you do need to know what that says, because it covers how all professionals work together to make sure that children are kept safe. You will have heard that there are changes to the way that Ofsted inspect schools. Again, we don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but they have talked about making sure that there are opportunities, if you fail your Ofsted inspection on safeguarding, for that to be a revisit within 3 months. And they're talking about those aspects that they will look at being around the recording of training, and making sure the single central record is in place. But again, we haven't seen the detail of those. And again, that will appear on my website once we have it. And the final thing that I am going to summarise for you on my website as soon as we've got it is the promised guidance around LGBTQ+. There was some noise in the media about this back in April. It was promised for July. I'm recording this on the 11th of July, and we haven't seen it yet. So again, that will be on my website as soon as we see it. I think that might have some reasonable impact on what every member of staff has to do in relation to the safeguarding aspect of LGBTQ+ pupils. So keep your eye out for that. So what do you need to do now? Everybody needs to read part 1 of Keeping Children Safe in Education 2023. We've got the draft document. They will inevitably change 1 or 2 small things at the beginning of the September term, but it is there ready to go pretty much. You also need to familiarise yourself with part 5, the child on child abuse. Everybody needs to reread the safeguarding policy. I'm sure any designated safeguarding leads that are listening to this will be trying to update that over the holidays. There is a short safeguarding policy, which I absolutely recommend, on my website, that is free for anybody who wants to download. It is up to date with Keeping Children Safe in Education 2023. But everybody needs to read your own one to make sure you know how to recognise and report safeguarding issues. Everybody needs to take responsibility for their own safeguarding training, as well as what's offered by schools. So anything that you need to make sure you ask for. And ultimately, you need to be absolutely sure what the safeguarding culture in your school is, and that you are a key part of embedding that. So hopefully that has helped you put into context where safeguarding is going, what you need to know for September 2023. And I look forward to hearing from you through my website if you feel that you can. Thank you. Bye.